our speaker, who is a fabulous, fabulous birder from the New York City Audubon Society, Tod Winston, and we're so happy to have him. I've known him for a while, and he leads fantastic bird walks, and he's taught me a lot. Every time I've had the chance to go out with him in the field. He started as a volunteer at the New York City Audubon in 2007, but he's had various positions there, and he really has a lead role with the organization. So we're so pleased to have him, and I look forward to a wonderful presentation. So thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you very much, Mary, and hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here tonight and honored to be asked to talk to you all about birds of New York City. Mary, I remember you in my beginning birding class. You were one of the most diligent students that I had in that class. I remember that you seemed excited about it and took it very seriously. That just leads me to say that, I do a bunch of things for New York City Audubon. I do a lot of writing for them. I lead their Harbor Herons nesting survey, and I lead bird walks. But really, honestly, one of the favorite things that I do in my life is teach a beginning birding course, introduce people to the joys of birds, as birds have given me so much joy in my life. So I'm really happy to share that with you tonight, and hopefully, I imagine some of you probably are birders. I wonder how many, I can't see all the hands, but how many of you are birders? Raise a hand. A couple of you, okay. And then a few tentative, a few tentative fingers. Okay, great. Well, so I hope those of you who are birders will find this a useful refresher and maybe learn a thing or two, and that those of you who aren't familiar will maybe learn something about New York City that you didn't really know before. The Birds of New York City and Conservation Efforts to Preserve Their Beauty. I like that title that you all came up with. It's succinct, and it really speaks to the several sides of what I do: admiring birds, enjoying birds so much, and also myself working so hard to protect them and trying to instill in other people an appreciation for birds, and get them invested in understanding that birds need our protection, that wildlife needs our protection, and that there's plenty of wildlife right in New York City that we can enjoy, and that needs our help to stay healthy and keep going into the coming years, given all the challenges we're facing today. This is a great egret flying across the New York City landscape. The great egret, some of you might know, is National Audubon's symbol. New York City Audubon is a chapter of National Audubon, but we're our own conservation nonprofit. There are hundreds of chapters of the Audubon Society across the United States, but the main organization symbol is the great egret, and that's because the great egret was going extinct in the early 1900s because it was overhunted, so that people could get enough of the lovely back plumes that the birds grow during breeding season for ladies' hats. So the birds were slaughtered in great numbers, and the Audubon Society and the modern conservation movement began partly out of work to protect birds like the great egret. And out of that work, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was passed in 1918, and thousands of native birds are now protected. A little over 1,000, I should say, of North American native birds are protected because of that Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Okay. So I think a lot of those of you who are joining this probably know that New York City is not just glass and cement, but even many people who live here are surprised to learn that New York City is one of the most popular birding destinations in the United States. That seems kind of insane, right? We're living in this city of sidewalks and cement where you often can't see much green. And though, of course, even the least bird aware New Yorker knows some birds. most people recognize this bird just from a glance, right? Our rock pigeons came from Europe. People brought them here, and they live very well with people, in and around people. And there's several other species that were brought here from Europe by people. The house sparrow is ubiquitous throughout the city. The little house sparrow here bathing in a puddle, as well as the European starling. All of these, this is sort of the triumvirate of bird immigrants that came from Europe, brought by people. And at least two of them, because people wanted all the birds of Shakespeare's sonnets to be all around the world. Sort of a crazy idea of the time, but that worked for these species. So these are survivor birds that live with people all over the world, and are originally from Europe. And you can see them pretty much in any city street. But maybe some of you know, and those of us who are into birds know, that New York City is home to so many kinds of birds and incredible diversity. All of these bird pictures were taken in New York City. And in fact, all of these birds are fairly frequently seen in New York City, depending on where you go and what time of the year you go to see them. So why NYC? Why is New York City such an exciting place for birds? Asks this wise old pigeon. Uh, Over 300 species have been recorded here, more than that in the metropolitan area, and over 275 in Central Park alone. That's a lot of bird species. And of those, about 200 are birds we regularly see here. And the answer to why New York City is so exciting for birds and birders has to do with something we know birds do, right? They don't stay in the same place. They migrate through the year. And we now understand, this is something we've really learned over the past couple of hundred years, that birds follow flyways, highways in the sky all around the globe. We're there on the right-hand side in the Americas, and in North and South America, we're right kind of in the middle of that green superhighway in the sky, the Atlantic flyway, that birds follow every fall and spring as they migrate from their wintering grounds to their nesting grounds. And that's a long way to fly. Along the way, they need to stop and rest and get food. And when they get to New York City, you can see on the map there's lots of green, and then there's a big patch of gray right where the city is. And when they get here, they discovered that there's this little patchwork of green oases where they can find food and rest and shelter. And so New York City works as a sort of a funnel. The birds come down the coast or come up the coast, sort of get crammed into New York City, and then they just shoot into our parks in great density of birds. When I was kind of a weird dorky birder kid, and my friend and I, my birding friend and I, as young teenagers, we were so excited about birds. And we heard about New York City as an exciting place, but we didn't really believe it. You know, I grew up in the country, sort of farm land, and I thought, I birded in the woods. I know what birding is about. And I didn't really believe that New York City could be so great for birds. I even lived here for about 10 years before I birded here. But I will forever regret that, because the concentration of birds you find in New York City parks during migration is kind of sort of crazy. It's like the dreams I had as a kid of being surrounded by beautiful, colorful songbirds. Because when birds come over the city, and many birds fly at night, songbirds do. So in the early AM, they are ready to land, and they land in parks like Central Park, Pelham Bay Park in the Bronx, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, the Queens is Jamaica Bay, and so many beautiful areas on Staten Island like Mount Loretta Unique Area. So birds, what's so special about birds? Why do we, I think you're here because you appreciate birds, but what's so special about them? I have a lifelong love of birds. I find them just endlessly fascinating as these kind of foreign creatures that we get to see up close through binoculars. You can see this snowy owl. What a strange being that is. I love this picture because it kind of looks like he's strolling in leisure pants across the beach. I think it's a she, actually. And But what is so special about them? One thing, of course, is that birds do something that we all, I think, at some point dream of doing. Birds fly. Birds achieve this incredible feat that seems so effortless for them. This bird, the Arctic tern, and by the way, if any of you are Spanish speakers, I have the Spanish names for these birds included here. I find them really interesting. I speak Spanish, and some of the names reveal interesting things about the birds that aren't included in the English name. Sorry about the siren here. The Arctic tern is one of the champions of migration. During the year, it migrates a 43,000-mile trip from Greenland to Antarctica and back. An incredible feat for this seemingly fragile bird. You know, I think that's one of the things that inspires me and others about birds is they're so beautiful, seem so fragile, and yet they're so incredibly resilient and fierce, and that they can travel through all sorts of weather, thousands of miles without any shelter. It's kind of incredible, right? How well adapted birds are. The Spanish name, El Charrán Ártico, charran, I think, imitates the sound of a tern, has a harsh kind of cha 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 sound. So the Spanish name kind of captures that. Birds, of course, are also beautiful. They come in beautiful colors, like these finches and a bunting on the left. And that almost looks made up, that picture, but it's actually a real picture. Someone must have waited to snap it. Or this beautiful harlequin duck that we see in the wintertime along the coast. Just in sort of surreal pattern, right, on this bird. And of course, birds do something else that we do. Birds sing. This is, I hope that video is coming through. This is a song sparrow, aptly named, sweet little bird. And oh, goodness gracious. Sorry about that. And the song sparrow, right, bird song is something I think that is another way that we aspire to be like a bird, right? When people sing, birds sing, and it's something that I imagine people have admired for as long as we have a name for a bird and a name for a person. Okay, what exactly is a bird? And here, I'm not sure if we mentioned it, but I would, if people want to put in the chat any thoughts they have about what exactly makes a bird a bird. Why is a bird different than another creature? Unfortunately, Mary, I don't actually know how to see the I don't know how to see the chat. I don't know if you see the chat.
I can see the chat, but there's really no answers in the chat.
Okay, people are shy or looking for the chat. That's okay. You know, what makes birds different from other creatures? What do birds have in common? They share some things with us, like they're vertebrates and they're warm-blooded. They also have two legs, like people do. And then there's some ways that they're different from people. They lay eggs, they have wings, they have beaks, and they sing. Those last few things are things they share with other creatures. Lizards lay eggs, and bats and insects have wings, right? Mice
Hey
apparently sing.
Todd, some people, you do have some responses. So eggs and fly.
Great.
Bird lays eggs and is warm-blooded. Descended from dinosaurs. Dinosaur remnants that fly. Laisha, our youngest watcher tonight, says beaks. So
Great.
that's what people are putting in the chat.
Great, thank you so much, Lydia. Yes, birds have beaks, and I think that almost is a unique thing, though. I think that the platypus has a beak, and sometimes people say turtles have a beak. Among the things that make birds really unique are some things that I think you'll recognize. Birds have feathers, right? Mammals and reptiles don't have feathers. This particular structure that that helps birds fly. Birds have a wishbone that some of us are familiar from a turkey, that helps protect their inner organs when they flap their wings, gives them flexibility to protect their body from that violent, constant motion of flight. And birds have some specializations that help them fly, make them very light. They have hollow bones and they have a respiratory system that allows them to cycle lots of oxygen through their body as they fly. Okay. And one of you got right to the point here. Where did birds come from? Right? Where did they come from? Not just from the primordial mist, like in this photo. Of course, we know that birds throughout history have served many useful purposes for humans. No, that's a joke. So I realize these slides are getting a little dated, but I think a lot of you know the Flintstones. Maybe some of the younger people don't know the Flintstones. The Flintstones, it's sort of a funny reference for birds because people didn't live at the same time as dinosaurs, but birds, that's another story. Birds are ancient, far more ancient than people. And as one of you mentioned in the chat, birds are not just descended from dinosaurs, but as we now understand it, birds actually are dinosaurs. Velociraptor, that some of you might remember from the Jurassic Park film, in the film, it was portrayed really more as sort of a scaly creature, right? Kind of a lizard-like dinosaur. But we now believe that Velociraptor had feathers, and it's part of an order of dinosaurs, the theropod dinosaurs, that we believe birds are actually also part of. So birds are actually considered to be avian dinosaurs. It's kind of a hard thing to get your head around, that birds, these ubiquitous creatures that we're so used to, are actually the last remnant of this ancient lineage of creatures, of dinosaurs that walked the earth 60 million years ago. It moves me talking about it. It's sort of awe-inspiring that when we see birds, we're actually seeing the last of the dinosaurs. And we learned a little bit about that history through the discovery of Archaeopteryx, ancient wing in Latin. And that was a fossil found that's believed to of a creature that we believe lived about 150 million years ago. So long before the dinosaurs went extinct 60 million years ago. And the Archaeopteryx had all sorts of characteristics that are kind of funny that we recognize in birds, but then aren't quite right. It was feathered, right? And it had the main structure of a bird, but it also had claws on its wings. It had teeth, which birds don't have. It had bones in its tail, which no birds have because they're too heavy for a bird to properly fly. So the Archaeopteryx was one of the first kind of proto-birds. And in the intervening 150 million years, birds have done really well. They've expanded into about 10,000 species worldwide. That seems to be growing as we discover more species and discover that there are more species contained in one species than we thought. There are about 925 in North America. I think that's great, larger now, actually, and about 350 that visit New York City. And they run from the tiniest bird, the Cuban bee hummingbird, or el sunsun, which is the smallest bird in the world. It's about the size of, without the beak, about the size of the end joint of your thumb. Very tiny bird with a long beak. To the common ostrich, a bird that lives on the plains of Africa, that's about 300 pounds and 9 feet tall. Okay, neither of those birds live in New York City, but we do have loads of interesting birds here. So let's get to know the birds of New York City a little bit. I'm going to start with an exciting group, that a sexy group of birds that everyone's always keen on learning about, the raptors, or birds of prey, right? And that includes many kinds of birds that live in our area. I'm just going to, as I am with several different families of birds, give you kind of the greatest hits of birds that we can see in New York City and talk a little bit about where they live in New York City and the most interesting facts about them. I'll start with this bird. Some of you might recognize by that tail on the left-hand side, the red-tailed hawk. Red-tailed hawks have become a very common bird in New York City over the past 30 years. Before that time, we really didn't see them in the city. This is an adult on the left. with that brick red tail, and a juvenile on the right that has just a striped tail. They both have, you can see on that bird on the right, a belly band across their lower breast, which is a characteristic way to know, a characteristic of the red-tailed hawk that really is helpful in identifying it. The call of the red-tailed hawk is a call that you will hear in any movie that shows any kind of bird of prey. Whether it's an eagle, a falcon, whatever it is, they play this call, and you might recognize it. That's the call that you hear, whatever the bird is. And if you're a bird watcher, it's always annoying because they show an eagle and then they play that call, and it kind of pulls you out of the drama because you know that that's not the right call for a bald eagle. The bald eagle itself has a very sort of plaintive little peep, peep, peep call that's not at all nearly as sexy as the red-tailed hawk's call. Okay. The red-tailed hawks first arrived here, some of you might remember, with pale male, a bird that arrived in Central Park in 1991. And pale male, some believe, continues breeding today in Central Park. He would be about 30 years old, 31 this year. And there's some disagreement about whether we're still seeing the real pale male or another similar looking hawk. But pale male, regardless, was the first of many red-tailed hawks that breed in the city, and they now breed in all 5 boroughs of New York City. Are really a very common bird that you can see in any park, often in small city parks where there's a good supply of pigeons and rats, which are some of their favorite foods.
You give me the headphones.
Yeah.
Now. Thank you.
Okay. Some other raptors we see in the city, we see a lot of peregrine falcons, the fastest bird in the world. Peregrine falcons nest on every bridge in New York City, it's thought. And the American kestrel.
You.
If you could all just make sure that your microphones are muted, that would be great.
Yeah.
The American kestrel is actually the most common raptor in New York City. And you might hear this call around the city. That's the call of the American kestrel, which nests on building ledges and window ledges high up in the city. And you often hear that call when it's around its nest. This is the kestrel nest. You can see that these 2 young kestrels have been very well fed by the evidence they've left. And kestrels nest in the early spring, I believe, in all over New York City. One of the first birds I saw in New York City when I moved here about 25 years ago was a kestrel. I was walking down 6th Avenue and I heard this crazy high-pitched scream, looked down the street and saw a kestrel struggling to stay above the traffic with a house sparrow in its talons. The house sparrow was screaming bloody murder, and the kestrel's trying to get up above the traffic with the house sparrow that it had captured. So it is a fierce little predator and does well in New York City. Okay,
You're getting me into this.
Another bird of prey that we often see in the city and in some of the larger parks by the water is the osprey, or el águila pescadora, a beautiful bird of open marshes that feeds on fish. There are over 24 nests of osprey just in Jamaica Bay. It's a bird that's done very well and has recovered over the past 40 years or so, like the peregrine falcon and like the bald eagle, due to the banning of the pesticide DDT. Oops, sorry about that. I keep leaning on that thing. The osprey is one of several species that's a real success story for the conservation movement by banning substances that weaken the bird's eggs, preventing them from being able to reproduce. These birds have really come back with a vengeance, and they've really become common birds across, at least across the eastern seaboard. Okay, another group of birds that's kind of New York City's charismatic megafauna are wading birds. Some of you might know that wading birds nest in New York City on islands across the harbor, and I'm going to show you that in a few minutes. There are a number of species, about 10 species have nested here regularly over the past 10 years. But among the most common species that we see are the egrets, the great egret and the snowy egret, beautiful white herons. The great egret has that big yellow bill and black feet, while the snowy egret has a kind of thin black bill and golden slippers. These are two birds that nest on islands around the harbor, and you can often see them foraging along the coast of any of the boroughs. Another bird that's always fun to see is the great blue heron, one of the largest wading birds we have. You can see that great blue heron has a bright blue patch of skin by the beak. That's called the lure. And like the great egret, where it's green, and the snowy egret, where it's bright yellow, the allure of the great blue heron turns a bright color just when it's breeding. It's kind of its fanciest colors that it puts on for its mate during breeding season. Great blue herons nest on Staten Island in one part, Clove Lakes Park. Another little pair of waders that are always fun to see are the night herons, the black-crowned night heron here on the left, and the yellow-crowned night heron, the crowned Martinete coronado. This picture was taken on Governor's Island, where yellow-crowned night herons nest in a tree there. And those are the little night heron chicks with bright orange eyes. The black-crowned night heron on left is the most abundant wader that nests in the harbor. And this is a yellow-crowned night heron. You'll see that the bird can actually raise its back feathers kind of like a peacock. This is a video. Hopefully it will come through.
Oh, both of them are here.
That was on a birding trip. You can hear people going, ooh. None of us really knew that the bird could do that. And another night heron flew in, and that bird threw up its back feathers. I'm not sure whether to impress it or to scare it off. I'm not sure if it was love or rivalry, but nevertheless, and you can see it also raised up its head feathers, its head plumes in a beautiful way. So the Harbor Heron Islands, there are about 18 islands in New York Harbor, some of them very close to the mainland, where birds nest, where all sorts of egrets and herons and gulls and cormorants nest. And for about 36 years now, New York City Audubon has led a nesting survey of those islands. I have coordinated that survey for the past 7 years, and we're getting ready to do that at the end of May. We had to take the year off last year because of the pandemic, but we're planning to get out there again this year. These birds, they move around the harbor, and we work hard to protect those islands and make sure that they have a safe place to nest, to move around as they need to, and keep their populations up. When we survey those nesting colonies, I'm always excited to see these little guys. These are great egrets and snow egrets with their babies. On an island, I believe this is South Brother Island off of the Bronx. And these guys are baby black-crowned night herons. Baby black-crowned night herons are some of the scariest and most helpless creatures you'll ever encounter. When you encounter them, they go like little dinosaurs and hiss at you, and they scare the bejesus out of you. But excuse me, is that proper? Sorry, that's not, I shouldn't use that term with a church group. Sorry. They scare the heck out of you, but they really can't do a thing, but they're effective. They're scary. Baby black-crowned night herons. Okay. Ducks and duck-like birds. These are some of the most well-known of birds. Very easy to see. They don't move too fast. And we're all probably familiar with some of the most common species, like the Canada goose and the mute swan. Both the Canada goose and the mute swan that we see in the city are birds that are here partly due to people. Mute swans are from Europe, and people brought them here to float around on their estates, and they escaped and decided that they liked living in North America, so they've spread. Canada geese are naturally migratory in the east, but people brought a race of Canada geese from the Midwest that's a large species that does not migrate. So when people complain about Canada geese on their golf courses and their lawns, they're complaining about a problem that people actually created because people brought Canada geese here that don't migrate. So Canada geese, like other species that people brought here, they're survivors, and they're doing okay. Some ducks that you might recognize are, of course, the mallard, beautiful bird that lives around the world. Um, the name here in Spanish is Ana de Azulón, sort of large blue duck, but um, in Spain, they call it El Pato Real, the royal duck, which I like. It gives it some respect. That is the, yeah.
Todd, there's a question. Are those the ones they make the coats out of?
Right. No, I'm gonna show you that bird. Actually, I have a picture of it, so I'll remember that and mention it in a few minutes. That's a particular kind of duck. Good question. The black duck is another native bird that is sort of similar to the female mallard, which is the sort of brownish bird on the left in the left-hand picture, but a little different, a little darker, and no white on that beautiful patch of iridescent feathers in its wing that you see when its wing is folded. That's called the speculum, or mirror in Latin, on ducks, that helps you identify them often. But we have many types of ducks here. One of the most beautiful is a particularly spectacular one, the wood duck. Wood ducks nest in several parks around the city. They've nested in Central Park, they nest in Prospect Park, and I'm certainly up in the Bronx and on Staten Island as well. That's the male again in the front and the female in the back. As many of you probably know, females are often not as gaudily colored among the birds. They need to hide on the nest, so they've evolved to be fairly well camouflaged, while males need generally to impress the females. And one way they do that is by being as colorful and healthy looking as possible. Another bird similar to the wood duck that visited us a couple years ago, some of you may have heard about it or gone to see it. Sorry, that's the wood duck, El Pato Joyuyo, is the mandarin duck. The mandarin duck is a bird from East Asia, and one bird seemed to probably escaped from someone's collection and visited Central Park and stayed around for a while a couple of years ago and got a lot of attention. And that's actually a close relative of the wood duck. They're the only members of their genus. By the way, that name, Pato Joyuyo, for wood duck, I believe it comes from, it's a Cuban name, Pato Uyuyo, which is sort of like a scaredy cat duck, a duck that sort of flees you when you get near it. And I think that spelling is maybe with the J is partly to also sound like Hoya, which is the word for jewel. It's kind of a jewel-like duck. That's what I'm thinking, that it's kind of a combination of a bird that's skittish and jewel-like. Okay. There are so many other kinds of birds water birds in New York City, however. This first bird is the common eider. That is the bird that people for centuries have raised and sort of informally farmed for eider down. That's what you put in pillows and quilts, eider down. And that's the male common eider. But there's so many different kinds of beautiful waterfowl that stop through New York City. Most of these birds come in the wintertime. So a highlight of wintertime bird watching is all the waterfowl that come. Waterfowl tend to get colorful in the winter because they pair up with their mate at that time. Whereas our songbirds wait a little while and don't get colorful till the spring. Okay. Gulls and terns. If you head to the beach, any beach, you're familiar with these birds. And New York City has plenty of coastline and beach where these birds do really well as on the islands where the harbor herons nest. You'll probably be familiar with the herring gull. That's our most common gull, at least in recent decades here. And we also have the biggest gull in the world, the great blackback gull, that lives in New York City. This is a bird that the great blackback gull is a gull that's also kind of a predator. It will sometimes eat smaller birds. I've heard of people on bird walks, watching a little. There's a kind of duck called a bufflehead, very cute little diving duck, watching a bufflehead and a great black-backed gull, and they get closer and closer, and the great black-backed gull drowned the bufflehead and ate it. So it's a fierce bird. It nests on the islands in the harbor. Also, both of these birds nest on rooftops in New York City. You'll be familiar with the call of the herring gull. Try to kind of close your eyes and imagine you're at the beach when you hear that call. And the great black-backed gull has a lower voice. Often on the islands, I hear that call and I think there's a person. It sounds kind of like a human voice to me. The other gull that you'll be familiar with probably is the laughing gull. The herring and great black-backed gull are here year-round and breed here. The laughing gull is just here during the warm months, and it also breeds here in Jamaica Bay. And a few years ago, at a lecture for New York City Audubon, we had the lecturer had a little game at the end where he asked us to vote for the bird with the best laugh. And it was kind of anticlimactic that the laughing gull won the contest, but it does have a very good laugh. That's the beautiful laughing gull. Common here in the summertime. Okay, another bird that's kind of gull-like and a really spectacular creature is the black skimmer. You can see that the black skimmer, this bird nests on beaches in Queens, and it feeds by running its lower mandible through the water, and whenever it touches a fish, it snaps shut in a reflex like that. So flocks of them will skim through the water, leaving a wake behind them of lines where they've been feeding. You can see in this next picture, it's incredible adaptation. Look at that bill. It's just razor thin. So it can run through the water and snap up a fish and not get caught on things, right? It probably can be placed with great precision. And that is, of course, a baby skimmer there. They nest right on the sand in the Rockaways of Queens, and also in Breezy Point occasionally. Okay, shorebirds. There are so many kinds of shorebirds. Shorebirds, like birds of prey, are one of the domains of the intense nerdy birder. There are many kinds of shorebirds that look exactly the same, and there are a few that have the patience to try to sort them out. But there are a few shorebirds that I'll share with you that are interesting birds that are easy to see and kind of get your attention in New York City. One is the beautiful piping plover. This is an endangered shorebird that nests on the beaches in New York City. The little baby there is one of the cutest creatures you can imagine, those long gangly legs. And these birds are protected according to state law and national law. They're vulnerable because they nest on beaches, and they compete with people for that space. So when you see areas on the beach that have what we call symbolic fencing, which is usually just a string, maybe with some sort of colorful ribbon on it, that's often to protect birds like the piping plover, as well as common terns and other species, to try to keep people out of their nesting area so that we don't tread on their eggs and scare them off of their nests. Another bird that accompanies those birds on the beach is the American oystercatcher, a beautiful bird that nests very loyally in pairs and protects their territory. They have a funny call. And New York City Audubon scientists banned American oystercatchers and track them as they migrate across along the Atlantic coast. And the last shorebird I'll talk about is the American woodcock. The woodcock is a bird that comes through here during migration, and it has a hard time during migration. It doesn't really know what to do when it encounters big buildings in New York City. And so actually around this time is when woodcocks are coming through, and in the weeks leading up to now. And they often are discovered by curious pedestrians on stoops and on street corners, sort of bewildered. The woodcock and many are taken to the Wild Bird Fund, which is a great organization on the Upper West Side that cares for injured birds. The American woodcock has a great call. That's the sexy call of the male American woodcock. And what it does is it flies up in the air and flies in circles and makes that twittering sound with its wing feathers to impress the female, and then plummets down to the ground and basks in the glory of admiring females, if it's lucky. Woodcocks also do a little dance when they're in breeding season. So we have a little music here, so it might be a little loud. Just be prepared for it. So that's a woodcock getting its groove on in the springtime. Okay, another group of birds that people love to hear about and talk about, of course, are the owls, a specialized group of birds of prey that are mostly nocturnal and have a lot of adaptations that allow them to hunt at night. They have these ear tufts, which are believed to help channel the sound somewhat, to help the birds that have very excellent hearing hear their prey. They have excellent vision, which you can see in their huge eyes. They also can turn their head almost completely around so that they can focus on sounds they hear of their prey. And they have very soft feathers and wing feathers that don't make much noise when the bird is flying, so that they can silently fly up on prey. We have several owl species that breed in New York City and pass through New York City. One of the most spectacular is the largest of the species, the great horned owl, El Búho Americano, which nests in, I think, some place in most of the boroughs, except Manhattan. You might know this call. That's the male and female calling to each other. The female is larger, but the male has a deeper voice. And these are young great horned owls photographed in the Bronx on a nest there a few years ago. A couple other owl species that we see here, the barn owl, which nests here and lives here full year round, and the tiny saw-whet owl, which is only about so high, maybe 7 inches high, tiny little bird. The barn owl has a sound that's often used in horror movies. I imagine maybe it scares mice and rats into moving so the owl can find them. You can see, if you look carelessly, that saw-whet owl has caught a mouse. And so if you know how tiny a field mouse is, I feel bad for the little mouse, you'll know how big that owl is. It's a very small little owl, and has a call that was named after whetting a saw. I don't know how many of us have whet a saw, but it sounds something like this. Okay. And two owls that come here in the wintertime. There have been a few, both of these species have been around this past winter, and one of them was in the news because people were so excited about the barred owl on the left and the snowy owl on the right. A snowy owl visited Central Park, which hadn't happened in about, I think, 130 years. So people were pretty excited about it. The barred owl has a call that people say sounds like, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" There's another calling in the background. So both of these birds visit us in the wintertime. Snowy owls, much rarer, but some winters, large numbers of them come south from the Arctic where they live. Okay, woodpeckers. You probably all have heard this sound. Woodpeckers are unique among the birds in that they drill holes in trees and they create homes for themselves. They find food that way, but also create homes for themselves and for other birds. There are some species that live here that are quite common, the downy and hairy woodpeckers. And I like their Spanish names, the pubescent and hairy woodpeckers. The downy woodpecker is the one on the left, smaller than the hairy on the right. That's a male on the left, downy with a red patch, and a female hairy on without the patch. They really look identical except for the size. Both males have a red patch. Both females have no patch. That's a female downy there in the center. It's a very common species, and this is downy's call is particularly this whinny sound. It's a very common sound in New York City parks if you listen for it. Another very common species in New York City parks is the red-bellied woodpecker. Beautiful, beautiful bird, as well as the flicker. Both of these birds nest here, and you can often hear their calls in the park. That's the red belly. And then the flicker. The yellow shafted flicker is what we have in the east with those beautiful gold wing linings. Out west, they have a red shafted flicker that has red wing linings, which is exciting to see if you go birding out west. And finally, one woodpecker, sort of the granddaddy of the woodpeckers that we have around today, is the pileated woodpecker. This picture was taken on Staten Island. Pileated woodpeckers have been nesting there in one of the wooded parks. Beautiful, big bird, as big as a crow, big woodpecker, beautiful bird that it's exciting that they're nesting in New York City.
Pileated, wonderful.
Okay, there are a few oddball birds I wanted to share. There's so many kinds of birds that it's like picking between my children, but I just want to share a few of them with you. I can't not share the beautiful rock pigeon, which we saw earlier, a bird from Europe. And you know, they don't get a lot of respect. People take them for granted, but they're really very beautiful if you stop to look at them. Beautiful iridescent feathers, and they come in a whole variety of patterns and colors. That's a result of people breeding pigeons. The native species looks like the one on the left. And you probably are also all familiar with the native cousin of the pigeon, the beautiful mourning dove. Mourning doves, when they fly, make a peculiar little twittering sound, which you often hear before you see the bird. And one other odd bird, some of you might recognize this sound. That's the sound of the ruby-throated hummingbird. A male with a beautiful ruby throat, and females and young birds that have a white throat. They're feeding on jewelweed, which blooms in the fall, and many ruby-throated hummingbirds come through Central Park and other parks where there's jewelweed in the fall in September. They also, if you go to Jamaica Bay, feed on trumpet vine, big red tubular flowers that hummingbirds are attracted to. And the past couple of years, hummingbirds have actually nested in Jamaica Bay. They make a beautiful little woven nest out of spider silk and plant fibers and adorn it with lichen to hide it. Kind of an amazing little craft of nature. Okay. Crows and jays, these are birds that are commonly seen and people sort of ignore them a little bit. Ravens are birds of the mountains that have come to New York City recently. And you'll hear a raven before you see it usually. Ravens can imitate human speech and make all sorts of sounds. They're very intelligent birds. While crows
Remember that from Maine? Do you remember that
Slightly
call?
different sound.
That call, you just heard that.
Okay. And related to these birds, people don't realize that they're in the same family, are blue jays. Blue jays are one of our most beautiful birds, and they are also corvids and smart like crows and ravens, thought to be some of the most intelligent of birds. You probably all know the blue jays call. Okay. There are many other species, if you go to our parks, that you'll see and hear: the chickadee and the titmouse. Um, Beautiful little songbirds that are here all year round and often come to feeders. The chickadee says his name, chickadee dee 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 dee. Chickadees and titmice often hang out with kinglets, tiny little birds almost as big as a hummingbird. The ruby crowned and the golden crowned. Um, the ruby crowned kinglet only has only the males have the crown, and both birds, when the males get excited, they show off their crowns. So there's something to see when you see an agitated kinglet. Often hanging out with birds like chickadees and titmice and kinglet is the beautiful white-breasted nuthatch, a bird that climbs up and down trees. It's like a woodpecker, that it goes on a tree, but it goes down a tree and around a tree, and has a funny little nasal call. Wrens. I want to just share with you something mostly about the Carolina wren. Has this beautiful little song. As Todd, it says, tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. And the similar looking house wren. Both of these birds nest in cavities, but Carolina wrens will nest pretty much anywhere. They'll nest in a potted plant. They'll nest in somebody's curtains if they leave their window open. Or they'll nest in a pair of shoes. They're really not so choosy about where they nest. Okay. Thrushes and mimids. I want to just talk a little bit about the robin. The American robin is one of the most common birds in New York City. And it's related to the wood thrush, which has what I think is one of the most beautiful bird songs. Okay. I'm gonna skip ahead just a little bit because I'm afraid we're gonna run out of time. I wanted to talk a little bit about bird song because people are often curious about it. Bird sounds include songs and calls. Songs, which tend to be longer and in phrases, usually during breeding season and in the morning. And birds have to learn their songs. They have to learn how to sing their song, while calls are shorter, and any time of the year you can hear them, and they have a bunch of different meanings that say, we think, I'm hungry, or there's danger, or come closer, or go away. They have many calls, and let's listen to the robin's various calls. We're going to go through its various calls, and you can hear all of these different calls that it's making. That's its dawn song there. It's excited. That's the whinny call when it's excited and upset about something. This call it makes when there's a hawk overhead. And this call you hear during migration, particularly in the fall. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to go ahead a little bit. Warblers Warblers are some of the birds that people are most excited about to see during bird migration. Some of the most colorful of our birds. Two species that live in New York City and are commonly seen here are the yellow warbler and the common yellowthroat. The yellow warbler says, "Sweet, sweet, sweet, I'm so sweet." And the common yellowthroat says, "To witchity, witchity, witch." But there are many kinds of warblers in New York City. About almost 30 species come through here during migration. And so birders go crazy over the warblers in the springtime. Beautiful, colorful songbirds that just mostly pass through here during migration. Like the warblers, a lot of the birds that are related to cardinals are very colorful. You all know the northern cardinal, the male, I'm sure, and the female. It's also beautiful in her own right. And the cardinal's beautiful song. But there are many birds in this sort of overall large sort of grouping of families that are very colorful. The rose-breasted grosbeak, which passes through in spring and sometimes will be seen at bird feeders. The scarlet tanager, that's the male on the left and the female on the right. The scarlet tanager has a song that's kind of like a robin song. Here's the robin. And we say the scarlet tanager sounds like a robin with a sore throat. Here's the scarlet tanager. A few other members of this sort of large group of sort of finch-like birds are the beautiful indigo bunting that comes through here during migration. It's a very sweet song and breeds in Brooklyn and on Staten Island. And the beautiful goldfinch. That's the male on the left and two females taking a bath on the right. Okay, and then one of the last groups of birds, we have a few members of this big group of birds of blackbirds, grackles, and orioles that are all related. The red-winged blackbird is always a favorite. Beautiful male red-winged blackbird sings a croaky song. The female is very different looking, and for many years, people didn't even understand they were the same species. That's the red-winged blackbird's okaree call. And related to blackbirds is the beautiful Baltimore oriole and orchard oriole that nest in many New York City parks. And finally, I don't want to leave them out, the sparrows. Sparrows are sometimes called little brown jobs because they're all brown and people tend to overlook them. The house sparrow is the bird from Europe that we saw earlier that has a rather simple song. That's the male on the left and the female on the right. And its song is basically this sound that you've all heard in the city streets. A sparrow that there are a lot around right now, a native sparrow, is the white-throated sparrow that come and spend the winter here. And now they're starting to sing their beautiful song. They're heading up to Canada, and people say that they say, "Oh, Canada, Canada, Canada," dreaming of Canada. Along with white-throated sparrows, you often will find dark-eyed juncos called snowbirds sometimes. El junco pizarroso, the slaty junco, another bird that spends the winter here. And all year round, we again see the beautiful song sparrow. It has a dot on its breast and stripes down its front. But like many other families, there are many kinds of sparrows to see, and all really very beautiful in their own right. Sparrows and birds related to sparrows, like the snow buntings there on the bottom right. Sparrows. So I wanted to talk just a little bit. I know I'm going a little bit late. Sorry, guys, but I don't have too much more to go. I wanted to just talk a little bit about what New York City Audubon does to protect birds, and we'd love to have your involvement if you're interested. Project Safe Flight is a program designed to help birds migrate safely through the city. This is a little golden crown kinglet that hit a window and was stunned, and many birds, in fact, hit windows in New York City. It actually is a big problem for birds. This is a sad picture of birds that hit just one building in one morning in New York City. And in fact, we estimate based on our research that 90 to 230,000 birds die each year in New York City alone from window collisions. It's actually a huge problem for birds. And just last year, we succeeded with a bunch of other partners in getting a law passed in New York City that all new buildings have to have bird-friendly design. And we are continuing to work to make New York City more bird-friendly and safer for birds passing through during migration. Project Safe Flight volunteers monitor routes for birds that might be killed or hurt. Here's one of our volunteers picking up a stunned ovenbird and taking it to, ovenbird is a kind of warbler, taking it to a rehabilitator. Sometimes we find, this is actually a bird that I took to a rehabilitator, a ruby-throated hummingbird that had hit a window. We monitor the tribute and light every September. Birds, those are actually birds in the light beams there. Birds get attracted to those light beams, and the organizers of the tribute work with us to make sure that not too many birds get trapped in the lights. Sometimes several thousand birds at once can get trapped in the light beams. And so we have a cooperative relationship with them. It's worked very well. We do all sorts of conservation research on horseshoe crabs, which lay eggs that feed shorebirds like the red knot. We do habitat restoration in the marshes of Jamaica Bay and beach cleanups. And we do public education to help protect a lot of the birds that we looked at earlier that nest on beaches in New York City. I'm going to share the slides with you, and you can also see the presentation afterwards. But these last slides, I just want to provide some information if some of you are interested in getting involved in birding. We have some information about binoculars. If you're thinking about binoculars, I'll send you more details, but you want to think about binoculars that are something like in the range of 8x42 or 7x35. That first number is the power of the binocular, and the second is how much you see through the binocular. And I'm happy to share with you some more details about that if any of you are interested in looking into getting binoculars. Binoculars are really the tool you need along with the field guide to see birds. And once you have those tools, you can really bird on your own, bird with people, bird any way you like. There are many kinds of field guides available with drawings or pictures, maps and photos. It's really not that complicated though, because the top ones are really only a few we recommend, and I'll share this with you. The Sibley guide or the Peterson guide are really the best field guides, and they're sort of your key to figuring out what you're seeing. If you're Spanish speaking, the Guía de Campo Kaufman is a really good birding guide to use. And all of the birding guides have apps that you have on your phone that are free or cheap and allow you to identify birds on your phone and also listen to their songs. So those are really easy to get through the App Store and a really useful way to learn about birds. And finally, go see some birds. Please come out with New York City Audubon. Each borough has a birding club that you can get involved in, and there are several other organizations in New York City that take people out birding all the time. And I hope this will not be the end of your birding adventure, just the beginning. I'd love to take any questions if you have questions. Trish, I think there you go. I can hear you now.
I'm online, but I'm interested in owls.
Yes. So
Many owls
there are a lot of owls in New York City. They're a little hard to find, but you know, New York City Audubon and other birding groups lead special trips to see owls, particularly in the wintertime, which is when we have barred owls and snowy owls here sometimes. So the wintertime is really the best time to see them.
I have a question. What type of parrots? I know that there was a slide, but I'm from Queens, and recently I've been seeing a lot of the Quaker parrots, the green ones. Is
Right.
that, yeah.
Hi, Carolina. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so you're seeing, they're called Quaker parrots and also called monk parakeets. And that's a species that's actually from South America. I saw them on a trip to Uruguay and Argentina a couple of years ago. They live there naturally, but people brought them here, and they like it up here. So they nest in parks in Queens and Brooklyn. And a green parrot with kind of a long tail.
Yeah, I used to have one, so I find
Oh.
it's funny because I see them and I'm like, oh, I used to have that parrot.
Yeah, well, they're very adaptable. They build these big sticky nests that you might have seen on power, telephone poles and on the gates of Greenwood Cemetery. They sometimes build around transformers on power lines because I think they keep the nest warm. And they're from South America, but they're hardy and they do well here. Other questions?
I just have a question about, I'm very ignorant about birds, but there's some kind of large predator birds sometimes where if they get in the city, I've seen actually the police come to try to, like they're up on up on an apartment building, and then it seems like it creates a bit of a crisis. What bird is that?
So I think probably the bird you're talking about is the red-tailed hawk that we saw pictures of earlier. And though sometimes people can be a little frightened of them, people don't really have anything to fear from red-tailed hawks. I've never really heard of a red-tailed hawk attacking a person, but sometimes young birds, because they do nest all over the city, young birds are kind of clumsy. They don't really know what they're doing. They play around as they learn to fly, and they can end up in kind of awkward situations on people's balconies, on their window ledges, and people don't really know what to do with this big fierce creature that's outside their window. So that's probably what you're seeing, but people don't really have anything to fear from. They have a lot more to fear from people and from cars.
We're from Atlanta, Georgia, where Mary's father and mother.
Oh, hello.
And we have a daughter, Katie Kratzer, who lives in Simsbury, Connecticut, and she was attacked by an owl while running in a trail. I don't know what the owl was.
It was a barred owl. He pounded me on my head and attacked me. He touched my chest. He kept flying up to me, and it like freaked me out. I felt it was like Monty Python and the rabbits attacking me, if you know what that movie is.
Oh, I hope you weren't hurt.
After me. I was not hurt, but it was scared, but also exciting.
Yeah, well, the main reason that any bird like that will attack you, and a number of birds will occasionally do that, is when you're near their nest and near their young. So occasionally, I haven't really heard it so much with owls. So you were lucky, I guess. But I've heard.
Was jealous of it.
Yeah, I'm jealous. But I hear it often with birds that are fairly harmless, like mockingbirds. I sort of skipped over the mockingbird because I was running a little long, but mockingbirds nest in the city and they often will dive bomb you. So will blue jays if you get too near their nest. So that's usually the reason, is they're protecting their babies.
So I just wanted to share that my friend Luann, who is on the call tonight, she and I have been tracking up here in Orange County, have been watching, what are they, red-tailed hawks, Luann, do you think? Anyway, this set of hawks who we've been watching them from dating all the way up to now they're sitting on eggs, and we're waiting for the birth to happen.
Well, that's great. That's exciting. Yeah, I mean,
It's very exciting.
I'm not sure. Red-tailed hawks are a pretty common species around here, but there are a few others that it could be. But yeah, I mean, and that's one of the amazing things about the red-tailed hawks of New York City is they do nest in every borough, and they allow access to, wild creatures in a way that's just crazy, sort of for a city like New York City.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
I'm wondering what we can do to keep birds from crashing into our windows. Is one little sticker enough, or does it take more?
So, there are a few ways to do it. Decals can be helpful if you probably need to place a few of them. I can share with information that I send to you afterwards, a page that we have on our website that provides tips for how to bird safe, make your windows bird safe. There are a number of products that are available now that make the glass visible to birds, but don't really obscure the view that much for people.
I want to just thank Tod for such a wonderful presentation. It was fabulous. We learned so much, and I'm hoping more people can see this now that we've recorded it. And I actually am planning to look at this to try to remember the bird names in Spanish, but that's going to be tough. So I want to thank Tod and everyone for joining. It was so wonderful, and good night, everyone. And thank you so much, and share this all with your friends and anyone you can think of that might really enjoy this. So thanks again.
Thank you all. Really nice spending a little time with you, and I hope you'll come out birding.